this data, in the meantime, is collected by scientific institutions such as the European Bird Census Council, based in Netherlands, which collects data on the distribution and the population numbers of birds, and calculates population trends. They categorized birds out of the several hundred birds we have in Europe. They categorized 33 species as so-called farmland birds. In the meantime, they increased it to 36 species. They added 3 other birds. This is, of course, a bit arbitrary. What is a farmland bird? But different dietary gills are represented. There are insectivorous birds. There are birds that go for seeds. There are birds that go for other birds or mammals, like the kestrel. And the trends of these birds that are believed to live in agricultural landscapes is summarized. And what we can easily see, there's a decline, in particular from 1980 to 1990. Then there is a stabilization. This is a summary of 33 species of farmland birds across 22 European countries. What we did, we used the same data behind this graph and calculated it for the individual bird species and came to a different graph that shows that although the majority of birds is declining, there have been some winners, some species that increased during the last 30 years. So is there some hope? Or does this just mean that there are bird species that can cope with the intensification better than others? One of the big losers, for example, just some examples, gray partridge. You might know these birds, hunters know it. People in former times, they like to eat it. Nowadays it's very difficult because it's on the red data books everywhere. 80% decline during the last 30 years. One of the losers then, red-backed shrike, for example, an insectivorous bird that likes structures, that goes for hedgerows, that lives along forest edges. It didn't care at all about any intensification agricultural changes. In the meantime, it's even increasing. And one of the big winners, for example, is Earl bunting. Due to some measures in the UK, they did very well from 100 pairs to 700 pairs. In other parts of Europe, this bird species is increasing. So I'm going to present now some examples that work locally as a cooperation between farmers, scientists, and conservationists on a number of bird species. What can be done to have intensive agriculture and at the same time farmland birds? First is a case study. One of the best known and well-researched species is the skylark. The skylark, everybody of you knows skylarks. 50% decline last 30 years. One of the major factors is the replacement of spring cereals by winter cereals. Skylarks do not like these dense winter cereals. They go for bare soil. And management practices. I looked a long time till I find a bird like this. It looks as a skylark. Creation of skylark plots you might have heard about, developed by the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds in the UK on their Hope Farm. They simply restored some bare soil habitat within the winter cereal field. And this measure was quickly adopted throughout Europe. And for example, in Germany nowadays, they have 10,000 of skylark plots. So removing the part of the winter cereals, part of the crop, either by herbicidal spraying or by simply convincing the farmer to stop his drilling machine while drilling to create a mosaic of skylark plots from the air. This will look like a bit patchy. A skylark plot is about 4 by 4 or 3 by 6 meters, and they say about 2 plots per hectare are enough to promote skylarks. And this happened, about 100% increase in the UK. in a part of the UK, I guess. Tim Benton might know more about that one. However, there has been a study in the Netherlands where Skylark plots did not work, and Skylarks did not positively respond, or not respond at all to Skylark plots. As I said, in Germany we have thousands of Skylark plots. Nobody has ever looked if they are efficient, if they work. So some scientific monitoring is needed to check the measures implied to restore farmland bird populations. So next species is partridge. I already talked about partridges. This is a bird that even suffered more than the skylark, more than 80% decline in Europe. I cite two projects, one in Germany, one in the UK. There are a number of other projects in Germany. This bird species goes for edges. It lives in the agricultural landscapes, but it requires a dense network of hedgerows, of side strips, flower strips, of field margins, and with the increasing intensification, larger field sizes, this bird simply disappears. Restoring partridges has been achieved by the implementation of edges, field margins, beetle banks within arable fields. Predators have to be controlled. For example, in Germany we have a major problem with wild boar going for partridges, partridge nests, if a forest is adjacent. Special seed mixtures have been developed which are sown into the field margins and from which partridges benefit. And indeed, in these two cases, partridge numbers increased, and even to 10-fold within 3 or 4 years. Next species, Labwing, same population decline, suffers from the replacement of spring cereals by winter cereals. It's the same story behind, as I mentioned in the very beginning, farmers going for the best cash crops, higher yields, more money. So, same with fodder beet and maize. And of course, this species is very sensible for agricultural operations during the growth period. We found two studies that work, one in Switzerland, one in the UK, simply by avoiding disturbances, creation of fallow plots, cessation of agricultural operations around nest sites. This means that we have to have scientists, monitors that run around in the fields, look where the nest is, then tell it to the farmer, then compensate the farmer for not operate around the nest site. Of course, predation, very important factor. So Montagu's harrier, that's a very elegant raptor going for voles. Voles are abundant in agricultural landscape, but this bird declines due to the replacement of spring cereals by winter cereals, because winter cereals are harvested earlier. And unfortunately, Montagu's harrier selected as prime nesting habitat cereal fields. That means that its nest is destroyed by the harvesting machine. So in Germany, in Bavaria, they had a very efficient project, and they brought up the local population of Montagu's harrier from 2 to 130 pairs, simply by fencing nest sites and compensating farmers for not harvesting around the nest sites. Again, you will need scientists, you will need monitors to identify the population, the nest sites of the Montagu's harrier. Similar projects in France and I believe in Spain were similarly successful. Windchat, not in the agricultural landscape, more in a grassland species, but suffers from the intensification of grassland management, also from organic grassland management. There is a study in Switzerland where in an area with more than 85% of organic grassland management, this species became virtually extinct. So hurry up. Early haymaking, lack of arthropods due to the planting of very few grass species, and lack of perches. This bird needs some structures within the meadow. increase in Germany and in projects in Austria simply by post-mowing, compensating the farmer for postponing mowing, and implementing unmown grassy margins. One last case study. This was found in Switzerland, and it's a very important one because it goes for very highly intensive vineyards and fruit orchards. In Switzerland, it was found that on organic vineyards, species like woodlark and several buntings simply disappeared. When herbicides were sprayed to remove the ground cover, these birds reappeared, and they preferred grass strip understory with parts of bare soil or even totally bare soil vineyards and fruit orchards. Why? Because these larks and also the buntings, they go for arthropods and they like to prey on bare soil. The arthropods are grown in the grass strips and move onto the bare soil. So the grass strip is seen as a kitchen and the bare soil as the dining room for these birds. It's easy, does not affect yield at all, but it's a very simple measure. This is a graph I adapted from Professor Aletas in Bern University, who did some very interesting research on this bare soil non-availability in the modern agricultural landscape. So what can be learned from this case study is, yes, we can restore any bird species in Europe on farmland, but it requires a multitude of measures, a cooperation of farmers, of scientists, scientific monitoring, and conservationists. They work local. It has to be checked if they work everywhere. The economic viability of a farmer has to be ensured, compensation, otherwise he will not produce Skylarks or Labwings. And a certain proportion of land is needed, mostly not with the vineyards I told you, but with all the other measures implementing site strips or field margins of Skylark plots or fallow plots, etc., will take out some agricultural land from production and devote it to the preservation of biodiversity. So I'll stop now. Thank you very much.